As President Obama tackles the deficit and tries to get an agreement to raise the debt ceiling, his economic team is more interested in academia. Larry Summers headed for Harvard, Christina Romer is at Berkeley, and Austin Goolsbee is bound for the University of Chicago. And last week, Bloomberg's Hans Nichols broke the news that Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner may also leave the administration. Well, joining us now to talk about a lot of things is Peter Orszag. He left his post last year as director of the Office of Management and Budget to join Citigroup. He is also a Bloomberg View columnist. So, Peter, great to have you here.
Good to be here.
Let's kick it off with the president's economic team. I guess it's not unusual to see the turnover, but with everything that's going on in Washington, is the timing okay?
Well, look, I think you correctly identified turnover is normal, and so, I mean, I don't think there's much to say beyond that, other than I think the team that was in place was the right team at the time, and turnover is natural.
What about, though, Timothy Geithner? Let me ask you that. I mean, he has said he'll wait until they deal with the debt ceiling. I mean, do you think it is crucial?
You really expect me to say something insightful? You could ask him.
I do. I mean, but you just as an outsider and someone who has an opinion, I mean, do you expect him to, potentially stay in place, that he needs to stay in place to kind of get through these hurdles, certainly dealing with the debt ceiling?
Well, he said that he will be in place for the foreseeable future, so beyond that, I'll let him speak for himself.
But do you think it's important that he stay there because he's been so crucial? And then I'll let you go.
I think that he's going to be there, certainly through the debt ceiling discussions, and that's obviously important. And he will make sure that any evolution is done in a responsible way, I'm sure.
Okay. I mean, that's what we reported, right, Peter, that he's going to be there until he gets a debt ceiling agreement.
Yes.
A phrase "for the foreseeable future" is about the most political phrase you could possibly use, because if you're going to stay till the end of the term, you say, I'm staying till the end of the term. At least you put some kind of limit on it.
That is a correct observation.
Let me ask you about the debt ceiling. I mean,
sure.
do you think we're going to get a solid agreement here by August 2nd, or do you think we're going to get the little kind of mini agreements that we got for the annual budget agreement?
Look, there are three possible outcomes here. There's the deal that gets you past the election. There is the rope-a-dope or sort of mini deal that is a few months at a time. And then there is the possibility that there's either calculated or miscalculated mistake, and that we actually do go over the cliff for some period of time. If you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have said the relative probabilities were sort of 70, 25, and 5 or less, and now I'd say it's more like 30, 60, 10. So the most likely outcome, I think, is a short-term deal.
The president also, Peter, yesterday said how both sides have to come out of their comfort zones. How likely is that? We had Representative Blackburn on, and I mean, she said taxes completely off the table. I mean, it sounds like nothing can be completely off the table. As we watch what's going on in Greece and Europe right now, it sounds like everything needs to be on the table.
Well, it's natural at this point of a process to have a lot of posturing. So I think the real question is, how much is it posturing and how much is it a line in the sand that will not be broken ultimately? I think what's clear is we're not going to have an increase in tax rates, but whether there can be some movement on tax expenditures or corporate tax reform, which happens to raise some revenue, I think that's going to be a key question.
You actually wrote a column, and one of your ideas involves the payroll tax holiday. Let me just write to everybody. I think you wrote about this last week, and you said policymakers should provide additional macroeconomic support in 2012 by extending the existing payroll tax holiday. But more than that, Congress should link the payroll tax to the unemployment rate. I mean, why would this be so effective in creating jobs, in your view?
Well, we face a very significant problem in that we're coming out of a severe downturn that was caused by financial distress. A hard slog is the most likely outcome following that kind of recession of 2 to 3% growth.
History tells us that, right?
It would be historically anomalous for us to grow at 4 or 5%, as people. I feel like we continue to have these Charlie Brown moments where we think we're about to grow at 4 or 5%. Oops, no. And again, oops, no. I think the expectation should be 2 to 3% growth for years, not quarters, coming out of this kind of downturn. And in that situation, a weak labor market is a very significant risk for a significant period of time. A continued payroll tax holiday, as long as the unemployment rate is elevated, can help a little. It won't solve the problem, but it can take the edge off a little bit.
But Peter, it's interesting, we're talking about two separate issues, right? Because the debt situation on the one hand is important to deal with medium to longer term. The growth and the job situation is a shorter term issue. You're talking about increasing stimulus when we're trying to figure out a way to plug the spending problem. How do you juxtapose? How do you mesh those two things?
That's exactly right. Look, we need, and this has been the case for the past couple of years. What we need is more assistance to the economy in the very short run because we are experiencing very sluggish growth, but then a lot more deficit reduction that's enacted now to take effect for 2015, 2016, 2017, and thereafter. So we have to be able to do this combination of more job support now, but a lot more deficit reduction that is enacted now but doesn't take effect immediately.
How likely is it that we get that, though? I mean, that seems pretty logical.
It's logical. We're now back to, my biggest concern at this point is that we have become increasingly polarized. This was also a subject of a Bloomberg View column.
It's a great column.
Increasingly polarized in the United States, and a gridlock Congress is, I think, our biggest problem along a whole host of dimensions, including our fiscal course.
I love what you wrote. I mean, we wanted to highlight this. You talk about what they're talking about, the backstop fiscal trigger currently being discussed as part of the debt limit negotiations. With this mechanism, you write, in place, congressional inaction would lead to automatic spending cuts and or revenue increases. So to really tie it together. But again, how likely are we going to see any of this happen with gridlock going on?
Well, we can hope. It's the right thing to happen.
But you've been inside. You see this. It's got to be frustrating that nothing gets done. I'm frustrated as a taxpayer that none of this seems to get done. I mean, how do we really get to that point?
That's why I think rather than continuing to kind of hope for kumbaya and Civics 101 to take over, we should be thinking much more carefully and hard about these kinds of things where we can flip the default so that we recognize that gridlock's going to be with us.
Right.
But let's try to figure out how to use it more to our advantage rather than continuing to be surprised that we're not getting the outcomes that we want.
Peter, when you see what's going on in Europe and Greece, I mean, do you say, wow, if we don't get our act together, this is truly us in just a few years?
Well, I think the question is timing. If we do not act, there's no question that ultimately we are going to face a fiscal crisis in this country. And my biggest concern along that dimension, again, is what we were just discussing, which is we are so polarized at this point that we can't agree on anything.
And Peter, I mean, you had an interesting column out today, and you were talking about the demand for water in China and how it's affecting the price of diesel here. It kind of feels like it's a diversion from what you normally talk about. Why is this such an important issue, and why write about it?
Well, it's an important issue for two reasons. First, China faces a very severe water problem, just period. It faced a significant problem even before the most recent drought, which is quite substantial. And then that has a variety of implications for diesel prices and everything else. But secondly, and what I tried to point out in that column is one of the core ways of dealing with the problem is to price water. So we each would get a free allocation for daily living, but beyond that, pay a market price for water. And that concept of using market forces for environmental purposes carries across water to climate change to a whole variety of settings.
All the carbon credits that we talk about.
Exactly. We in order to do market forces are very powerful, and they can help us address a whole variety of environmental problems, from climate change to water shortages. But we have to have the political courage to enact the pricing.
Or China has to have the political courage.
China may lead the way here. Well, we will see. China may wind up with a more market-oriented system than we have here for pricing water.
Peter, I pointed out to Carol this morning, we could also see a column entitled "Why We Should Care About Recycling on the Death Star." I mean, you don't have very much chance of actually getting China to focus on less pollution and better pricing of water, or do you? I mean, where do you think?
I think you do. This has been at the top of the concern among the Chinese leadership. You're seeing huge investments in in new plants and in a massive project to move water from the south, where it's relatively abundant, to the north, where it's really scarce, in an unprecedented move. So, and in addition to that, exploring, they already do have some degree of pricing, but exploring more pricing too. So I think it actually is at the top of the list, so much so that a variety of Chinese scholars believe it is among the most important impediments to medium-term economic growth if it's not addressed.
It's interesting you talk about that and how important it is to China, and I think it's probably not on our radar at all here in the United States. And so, there's so many differences between the U.S. Just think about today, China raising interest rates again, the fifth time since I think October. We're on a whole different policy
part
here.
Of the cycle, yeah.
It's a whole different economic, whole different fiscal policy. Is that going to be a huge conflict going forward? I mean, we're already seeing signs of it between what's going on in China and what's going on in the United States.
Well, look, on that, yes, China's biggest concern at this point is inflation, not
slowing down growth. Yeah,
and we're at the opposite side of that. And in fact, that's a broader theme, which is that we have this sort of bipolar global economy at this point, with very rapid growth in parts of the developing world and the hard slog that I was talking about before, both here and in continental Europe.
I wonder, as someone who comes out of Washington and now you're vice chairman for global banking at Citi, how do you see us addressing these issues? Because a lot of people in emerging markets are angry at the inflation that they see as exported from the U.S., right? They're angry at the moves that the Fed are making that are heating up their economies.
Well, look, medium term, the adjustment that has to happen is that we need to save more and gradually reduce our current account deficit. And that's part of the adjustment that's going to have to happen in the global economy. And it's my hope that it will happen gradually and smoothly rather than suddenly. And that, frankly, is to no small degree up to us. We need to not only keep our households, after we get out of this hard slog period over the next year or two, keep our saving rate up thereafter and address our medium-term budget deficit.
So you're confident in the next year or two we're going to get out of this slog, this tough slog?
No, I think we are going to be in a hard slog for a year or two, and I'm hopeful that thereafter we'll return to more rapid growth.
We get out of the new norm.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see what happens. Peter, great to get some time with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on all your new stuff, Peter Orszag.